Welcome back to One on One. We are now pleased to be joined by Jake Brown. Jake is the co-host of the Amazing But True podcast and the Gangs All Here podcast. He's also covered Mets games for the New York Post this season. Jake, so glad to have you on the show. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me on, guys. How's it going?
Good. I just want to get right into it, starting with the Mets, which you've obviously have a lot of familiarity with the podcast and the coverage. I just want to know, looking back at past Mets seasons, where do you think this one, compares to those? They're obviously trying to go in a new direction under Steve Cohen. Do you think this has been a success of a season, or maybe more of a failure? Maybe we're somewhere in the middle.
Definitely more of a failure. I think when you're in first place for 103 days and miss the playoffs and finish under 500, that's as bad as it gets. There's obviously some positives to take from this team, but overall, you can't be in first place that long and regress like they did. We knew that schedule in August with the Giants, the Dodgers, nonstop was probably going to kill them, but I didn't think it'd kill them to the point where they'd be eliminated with 8-9 games left on the schedule. A lot of questions to answer in the offseason, but while it was a disappointing season, there are some good things you can take into the offseason, some good things you could take into the future. They have the money to spend. Steve Cohen didn't actually do it as much as we would hope in offseason number one, but now he's got a year under his belt. He's got his feet wet, and there's no excuses now. There's going to be a new manager. There's going to be a new general manager. There's going to be a new president of baseball operations. It's going to be a big overhaul this offseason, and they're not light years away from being a playoff contender. Clearly, when you're in first place for 100 days, you're not that far away. And it's not like anyone else in the NL East exactly ran away with this division. So I think with a good offseason, a strong offseason, a lot of money spent in the offseason, the right manager put in place, I think they could turn this ship around. But definitely overall, it's got to be frustrating because, again, I was there 50 plus times, and this was one of the better home teams in baseball, and they were just atrocious on the road. Just an absolutely terrible team on the road, to the point where the Orioles were only a couple of games worse than them, and they were the worst team in the league. So we'll see what happens this offseason, but definitely frustrating a couple of months here.
Yeah, certainly an eventful year for the Mets, to say the least. As you said, they were in first place for 103 straight days, which is very impressive considering how the season ended up for them. With this new regime, what do they have to do to ensure that the 2022 campaign has a more positive ending? Does this come down to spending money, or is there something else they can do internally to fix issues that have been plaguing them?
Well, the right manager put in place is definitely going to help. Luis Rojas was in over his head. He was just a god-awful manager. He did everything by the books. It was almost nothing was by a feel of the game. The feel for the game of baseball was lost. It was all matchups, up, downs. This guy's pitch count's too high. He's gone too many innings, to the point where you could predict what was going to happen. All right, fifth inning over, 80 pitches. This guy's coming out. Go to the bullpen. Middle relief blows it. They don't get a big hit. Runners in scoring position, nobody outs. They don't score. So it became robotic a lot this year. So I think the right manager will make a huge difference. A good manager wins you 8 to 10 games that you might have lost. The Mets led the league in one-run losses. There was a reason for that. Yeah, they didn't get the clutch hit. Yeah, they didn't have a lot of talent at times. Guys underperformed. Of course, there's no denying that. But also, the manager affected a lot of those games. So that's one thing, too. Yes, you got to spend money. I think they made some moves, but not enough. Obviously, the Lindor move was talked about, but look at what JT Realmuto did versus what James McCann did. I mean, that difference, that's a 5 to 10 game difference alone right there. George Springer, I thought you could have had him as well. Starting pitching depth, they said they had all of it. Clearly, there wasn't enough of it. Having Jacob deGrom back healthy. I mean, he was a win every 5 days, essentially, and you lost out on 5 to 10 wins there in the second half from him missing time. So staying healthy, addressing depth, and getting the right manager are going to be important. But, yeah, Steve Cohen, everyone wants to talk about all the money he spent. My co-host Figgy always says, everyone hyped him all the money, but what money did he spend? He didn't spend as much as we would hope. And money doesn't always address, all the issues a team has. But for a team that has struggled in some ways financially under the Wilpons, Cohen's got to come in there and spend as much as he can to make this team champion. Because he said, the 2 to 4 year window, whatever it was. Well, we're entering year 2 now, and the Mets in year 1 missed the playoffs. So it's really playoffs or bust in 2022. And, it takes the cash to do that.
You talk about the moves the Mets, need to make this offseason. The one move they did make at the deadline was bringing in Javier Baez. Where do you think he, sits in with the Mets next year? Do they look to re-sign him? Are they going to let him go? Obviously, he has a high strikeout rate, but he did hit pretty well, hit over 300 with the Mets this season. Do you think they're going to look to bring him back? And then maybe your perspective, do you think that's the right move for them?
Yeah, well, it's crazy since thumbs down gate, as we called it. He's been incredible, and he's become a must sign now. Like, Sandy Alderson, I didn't mention him, is another issue. This guy's got to go, but unfortunately, he's going to be here one more year, which makes no sense with all the, bags that he's fumbled, as the kids say now. He's fumbled a lot of bags. And, I think he's going to be a problem maybe in this. I don't know if Sandy's in love with spending a ton of money on Baez, but you have to give him an offer. I mean, the way he runs the bases, the fact that he could play second, third, and short, really, if you need him. His power ability, obviously the strikeouts are frustrating, and the fact he doesn't get on base is frustrating, but that's something that could be worked on. But he just brings so much to a team. Lindor loves him. Seems like teammates love him. He's too talented to not offer. If you could get him for 5 and for 125 or whatever it is, it seems like a no-brainer. We'll see what they offer. I think you have to give him something. It's up to him if he accepts or declines it. It seems like, he likes playing with Lindor and likes some of the guys. It's too short a sample size to say he's in love with New York. I think he's a guy who, if he's going to get 30 million, somewhere else versus 25 million a year here, he might go elsewhere, but it would be just stupid if you don't give him a big money offer. Now, I'm not in the 8 to 10 year kind of window. Year one, it didn't work out great with Lindor, but he did pick it up as the season went along. I'm more of, all right, let's see if we could get him for 5 years, maybe 4 and an option. That seems to make more sense.
Jake, you touched on it earlier about Jacob deGrom and the health concerns. This year obviously had his moments of brilliance, 7-2, 1.08 ERA. Unfortunately for him, the fans and the rest of the team, he had that persistent elbow inflammation all year that had kept him out. Given what we know about the injury and what we know about deGrom as a pitcher, what do you expect from him next season?
I expect greatness. I mean, he's the GOAT. I mean, he's had a lot of time to rest. The Mets were very strange in their explanation of that injury and how it, recovered by the whole thing was just weird. But I think a full off season here to rest it up, he's going to be back and better than ever. And I'd like to see them have him go, and he's in good enough shape to go 7 or 8 every time. I mean, the guy got a lot of injuries this year. I get it. He gets pulled after 5 innings. Some starts would love to, they need to get back to once every 5 days. deGrom's giving you 7 every single time, sometimes 8, and then the occasional 9. We almost never see 9 anymore. But I'd like to see, a few complete games because he's got it in him. So I'm not too worried about it. I think, this long off season, get his mind right, get everything right. He's going to be fine next year, and they need him. I mean, I think that's a big difference in the second half too. Him not out there. And when you lose 2 or 3 in a row, they didn't have the deGrom to bring them back to life. They had Rich Hill and Carlos Carrasco try to bring them back to life. Stroman, did well and picked up a big load, but still, Stroman's not a guy every 5 days who's pitching a shutout almost every time. Great season. You try to re-sign him potentially, but he's no Jacob deGrom.
We talked about how the Mets held on to that first place in the NL East for so long, and then they kind of just seemed to lose it towards the end of the season. Was there a moment throughout that time, maybe the Atlanta Braves series or the NL West series, where you felt like the Mets were really going to not hold on to that first place, and it seemed like they were on the rear view window, like looking in on the playoffs? Was there a single moment maybe during the regular season where, that kind of like set in on you?
Yeah, well, the Brave series, Figgy will point to a lot because he felt they could have really put the hammer down on them. 5-game series, you win 4 out of 5, things change. They did not. I think that stretch against the Dodgers and Giants is when it started kicking in of, all right, this thing, might slip away from us here. And then that sweep in Philly, I did our first live show on that Sunday, and they get swept, and it was the most lifeless game ever. And I mean, it was hard to do a podcast after that. I'm like, is anyone there? Bueller, is anyone there? So that Phillies weekend and really those Giants and Dodgers series were really the point. You're like, all right, we're in trouble. And then, The final nail in the coffin, and I called it the funeral. It felt like a funeral leaving Citi Field, was that extra inning game where Rojas made just too many mistakes to even go through. And then Lindor had the double play in extra innings. And then they lose, and I think it was 11 against the Cardinals, and that really propelled the Cardinals on their 17-game win streak. I thought if they won that game, there was a glimmer of hope after that Subway Series. You thought, all right, maybe this is what ignites this team. You win on that Tuesday game. I think they would have been 2.5 out, but they lose that game. And after that, it was just downhill. They just couldn't win a game. They were losing every day, but it was really those West Coast games that the West Coast games put the August nail in the coffin. The game in 11 innings against the Cardinals put the final backstabbing into my back when I left Citi Field.
Definitely a lot of missed opportunities to assert themselves in the division against Atlanta and that West Coast series, as you mentioned. After the events of this summer that were tragic in one sense for a team that was in first place for such a long period of time, a lot of people are talking about who's coming back and who's played their last game in Flushing. And right now, two guys that are at the center of those conversations are Michael Conforto and Noah Syndergaard. Those guys obviously are fan favorites from those magical runs in 2015, 2016. Do you think they should offer those guys qualifying deals, or where do you stand on their future in New York?
I'm not goo gaga over Syndergaard like a lot of Mets fans are. I think, he's pitched 1 inning in 2 years. He's not the most mature guy, but I think he does have great stuff. And when he's healthy, he's a good pitcher. He's been inconsistent at times. He had command issues at times, but when he's healthy, it's a no-brainer. So I think you have to offer him the qualifying offer. Because listen, if Syndergaard goes elsewhere, you have the Zach Wheeler thing happen again, right in your face. Zach Wheeler's getting around $20 million a year. That's right around where the qualifying offer is, and it's 1 year. And also with Cohen, you're not in this Wilpon stage of, we got a penny pinch, and that's a lot of money. It's Cohen, give him the qualifying offer. It's a no-brainer that he accepts it. He's not getting a long-term deal, after all the injuries and the setbacks. And we didn't even get to see him throw his off-speed stuff. We saw the changeup, but, the doctor said he can't throw his breaking ball. So that's still something we have to see. Or, God forbid, hopefully he gets through, Sunday's 1 inning, which I still don't get what the point of throwing him out there for another meaningless inning is. It was nice to see him the other day. Yeah, maybe that sold, a couple extra tickets, but yeah, I would definitely give Syndergaard the qualifying offer. Conforto, it's weird because I think we all love him. He's a likable guy. The ladies love him. He's a good looking dude. Same for Syndergaard, but I don't know. He had such a down year that it's almost like you need a drastic offseason, and I don't know if he's part of the plans. Now, if you don't end up getting someone like a Castellanos or one of those other names out there for 1 year, I think it's a no-brainer. Scott Boras is his agent too, and Scott Boras hates the Mets, and that's going to be something that could put a wrench in the Mets' plans as well. If he gets 3 years, $45 million from someone else, you understand why he takes it. Gun in my head right now, I'd say yes, give them both the qualifying offer, and you hope this is just a down year. It was a weird year with the injuries, with COVID, with everything and the protocols. So maybe you think next year he comes back, but this was a down year for him. Didn't hit well versus lefties, wasn't great in the clutch, but he did bring good defense, and his teammates love him. It just was a weird feeling because you felt like it was over at Citi Field Thursday night with the whole goodbyes and everything. And if this was it and the tears, it just felt like, he's going to go elsewhere. But I would still give him the qualifying offer because he has brought a lot to this team.
We talked a lot about the negatives with this Mets team, the struggles. What was the one bright spot maybe you saw with this team this year? Outside of Jacob deGrom, we all know he was spectacular. Obviously, he doesn't finish out the year, but was there, a lone bright star in this lineup or in the bullpen or the starting rotation that you saw throughout the year?
Yeah, well, I think Stroman was a bright spot. I think he came in on that qualifying offer. And, that does show you what the qualifying offer does sometimes. It motivates guys to go get a long-term deal, and also gives you $19-20 million for a year, which is a handsome payday. And it worked for Stroman. It motivated him. He was great. He was a bright spot for this team. I think when he played, Brandon Nimmo was a bright spot, another 400-plus OBP year. So he really established himself as a good leadoff hitter. Sometimes he drives you nuts with his base running, and mistakes on the base pass in the field sometimes, maybe looking at too many pitches, striking out looking with him is sometimes frustrating, but he was a bright spot when he was healthy. Pete Alonso was, a mainstay, another big year, almost 40 homers. He's going to finish with 37, 38 homers. So he was a bright spot. That's pretty much it. I mean, and then Aaron Loup was the free agent signing of the year, sub 1 ERA. You have to bring Aaron Loup back no matter what it takes. So really, pitching wise, I look at Loup and Stroman as the bright spots, and then hitting wise, Nimmo when he was out there, and Pete Alonso showing, he didn't regress. He was still the same hitter, and if he gets support around him in that lineup, which he didn't get enough of, that's a bright spot down the road. That Pete Alonso is your franchise player. Because people debate he's the face of the team. This year proved that he might be the face of the Mets, and he's going to be a guy that you have to consider. That's another guy you got to look forward to in the future, signing long term. Pete Alonso made more in the 2 home run derbies that he won than his actual salary for the season. So he's a guy who's going to get $25-30 million down the road, and he looks like he could be the face of this franchise.
Staying in the vicinity of bright spots and things you can take away from this year, as I watched the Mets this season, I kept thinking about one word: personality. This October is going to mark 35 years since their last World Series win in '86. And that team had guys like Darryl Strawberry, Doc Gooden, Lenny Dykstra, the list goes on and on, that just were a melting pot of different dispositions. I'm wondering, chemistry-wise, from what you've seen from this core, however you choose to define the core, whether it be guys like deGrom and Alonso, or maybe Lindor has worked his way into that definition of the core going forward, Baez, if they choose to resign him. Does this club have personalities that at a certain point could just click and ride the wave to a postseason in the future?
I think some of the players do, but the manager had zero. As I said, he was a robot. You need a manager that has some personality. You don't need exactly a guy who's going to flip over the dinner table after a game. But as much as I would hate on Terry Collins, and I've liked him more since having him on the show and talking to him, he's just the nicest guy. And I loved the fire that he at least brought, to post games. This is New York. This is a city where we have fiery people. We'll tell it how it is. We'll call you an idiot if we have to. We'll call you stupid if we have to. We'll curse if you cut us off in the street. You need a manager that kind of represents New York and that the fans are going to respect. And I don't think Luis Rojas brought that. Well, he was a nice guy and the players might have liked him. He held nobody accountable. He never held himself accountable. Never called himself out for making a mistake, for making the wrong decision, for putting the wrong guy in, for taking the guy out too early. He never did that. And it was just frustrating night after night to get that. So I think with the right manager hire, if they got Bob Melvin, that's great. I don't know if he would leave Oakland, but Oakland did miss the playoffs. Maybe you have the Billy Bean, Bob Melvin pairing. I always wanted Bob Melvin before Terry Collins, and they get him. Buck Showalter's a name that's always floating out there. People will float Wally Backman out there, but the organization never, especially Sandy. Sandy hates Wally. Wally told me that personally. Wally said Sandy hates him. So that avenue is never happening with Wally Backman, as much as fire as he brings. Talk about 86 Mets. He was one of those guys in the documentary too that still would love to have a managing job that's better than Long Island Ducks. No offense to the Ducks, but the Mets is obviously a bigger job than the streets of East Islip. So the fire, if you get the fire from a manager, it's there. I mean, you see it from some of these guys, but in my mind, some of them, it's just too soft right now. The whole thumbs down thing, it comes from your manager, and it just seems like in some aspects, I mean, we're in a softer generation. There's no doubt about that, but it felt like at times this team was soft, and Baez was a guy that brought some, energy. The whole Subway Series thing and the whistling, Lindor and Baez brought some energy to this team. But you saw early in the year, with the Dom Smith and the Alvarez situation, kind of didn't face the music there and go after him. I think this team could use some cojones, as we say on the podcast a lot. They could use some cojones, and I hope they get the right manager to bring some cojones to the 2022 Mets.
Now, Jake, before we let you go, I do want to ask about your time with the New York Post. You've now worked there for 2 years, and you've helped launch a series of podcasts. What has your experience been like working for the Post and, working on all those podcasts, like during your time so far?
It's been great. Today was my 2-year anniversary, and I'm pretty proud of what we've done, considering I haven't had like a team of people. I've had like 10 to 15 hours of help every week, but I've kind of did it on my own, haven't taken time off. So soon I'm looking, now that this Mets season is coming to an end, which at this point I'm kind of happy about. Obviously I wanted the playoffs, but I'm looking forward to getting a break from the nightly frustration of watching this team. For the most part, at least the last 2 months, been super frustrating. So yeah, I mean, we've done great things, and we're hoping to expand to video soon, and maybe new shows coming down the road. Stay tuned for that. But what we've done is cool. We at one point we're top 10 in categories for Mets and Rangers. We've been in the top 50 for the other teams. We've had better guest lists than any of those teams' podcasts in the country. Honestly, I've personally got to interview my heroes, from Mike Piazza to David Wright, Joe Namath, Patrick Ewing, Allen Houston, Eli Manning last week was a big one. We've had some great Rangers guests. So it's really, I've gotten so many reps in producing, hosting, being the third guy, that I feel like we could take this thing to a new level, and we've really cemented ourselves, knowing, I launched shows for the New York Post, which I'm proud of, because it's the New York Post, it's a newspaper I read as a kid, read at my grandparents' house growing up, bringing pizza over there and reading the Post. And now my face and my ads are in the Post. I got to, I did it in my 20s. Now I'm 30, but I started, I was 28. So I was pretty young, and talking to guys like you and teaching you that, if you put the hard work in and the work ethic is there, you could reach this point. And I'm not even close to where I want to be. So definitely proud of what we've done in 2 years, more to come. And I'm excited for the future. And I've done it over with some terrible teams. The Knicks had a little bit of a bright spot, but even the Yankees, to their standards, haven't been great. The Mets have been bad. Now the Knicks are on the come up. Nets are okay. The Rangers are young, getting better. So it's been exciting to do great content with terrible performances from teams. So once these teams are good again, I think there'll be more hype around the shows. If we can win a championship and have a championship parade podcast, that's kind of my goal for the coming year or two.
Once again, Jake Brown, co-host of the Amazing But True podcast and the Gangs Out Here podcast. Be sure to check him out on Twitter at Jake Brown Radio. Jake, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, guys. Appreciate it.